Well, welcome to this session. I'm Jim McMahon. I'm the leader of the LGA Labour Group, and I'm delighted to be joined by Harriet Harman, the acting leader of the Labour Party, who's going to go to the lectern and give us a speech, followed by about 10 minutes of question and answer.
Thanks very much. And thanks for inviting me here today to speak to you. First, I'd like to pay tribute to Councillor Dave Sparks, who's led Dudley Council with distinction for so many years and who served as your chair for albeit too brief a time. But can I congratulate his successor, Councillor Gary Porter. Gary, you're probably out there somewhere or having a cup of tea alternatively. You take on the role of leading the LGA. Actually, I can't see you. There isn't any way they can turn the lights down. Ah, that's better. I can see you all. Excellent. Hello. But anyway, to Gary, who I'm now scanning the audience for, he takes on the role of leading the LGA at a critical time for local government. And though we're not in the same party, I want to say very clearly to Gary that we'll work to back you up in your role of championing the cause of local government. And I hope you will see us as strong allies standing up for local government in Westminster. And I'm delighted that this session is being chaired by a great councillor and good friend of mine, Jim McMahon. And I'm here with Emma Reynolds, who, having led for us on housing, is now Shadow Secretary of State for Communities and Local Government, and Steve Reid, our Shadow Minister for Local Government, who will be known to many of you as the former leader of Lambeth Council, and who's in the tradition of some of the best council leaders who then bring that experience into Parliament. This is an important conference, and it's great meeting here in the historic and beautiful spa town of Harrogate. Some people come to Harrogate to relax, unwind, have a bit of pampering and feel good about themselves, and others come to the LGA conference. It won't be restful, but it will be invigorating because you all care and are deeply involved in local government. So I'm delighted to be with you here today, though sorry to be speaking to you today as the opposition rather than a minister, but that's democracy for you. You know, we wanted to be in government, but that's not the job we got. But the job we did get is nonetheless very important, which is to be the opposition, to scrutinise government plans, to hold them to account. And we will need to, as we embark on the next 5 years of opposition, take a serious look within our own party at our relationship between our party in Parliament and our party in local government. We can't be behind where the people are. And while people want a coherent centre doing what it needs to do, they have no time anymore for things being done centrally, which should be being done locally, and they don't want a top-down approach. And I think in our party, we all feel that we could do it better, both in the terms of the devolution agenda, the financial framework for local government, and the political partnership between the central and the local. And that means change in the policies, but also in the processes and in our political culture. We meet here at a turbulent time for democratic politics. For too many people, politics is a dirty word and politician a term of abuse. And we all, in our different ways, have to work to rebuild confidence in our democratic politics. And you, as elected councillors and council leaders, are a crucial part of that. At a time when people feel that politicians live on a different planet, you're local, you live in the authority you represent, you're out and about in your communities. You are the politician that people are not only most likely to see, but also most likely to know. And when you take up a problem on someone's behalf, it can make a real difference to their lives. As people see you responding to the individual concerns and complaints that they have and involving yourself in improving your area and local services, you are building and sustaining trust in politics. And whether it's caring for the vulnerable or whether it's schools, libraries, leisure centres, parks, children's centres, the work that councils do is of huge importance and greatly valued. In this difficult time for local government, by far the most pressing issue is the challenge of council finances. Undoubtedly, this is a time of a general fall in public spending when tough choices need to be made. But the government's choices are having a disproportionate impact on local government. You've already undergone many years of falling funding, cut by 40% over the period of the last Parliament, disproportionately hitting most deprived areas. On top of this, even without any further reductions in next week's budget or the autumn statement, you're set to face further cuts of 3.3 million in 2016-17 billion, sorry. The report you published last week, which is an excellent report, shows this will leave councils facing a funding gap of £9.5 billion by the end of the decade. And I know it's a great deal easier to say than to do, but it's to your credit on behalf of people in your areas that you've risen to the challenges so far by looking afresh at what you do and how you do it, whether by pooling staff and sharing services, as Bolsover and North East Derbyshire councils have done, or like Blackburn and Darwen Council, who've saved £2.2 million in just 1 year by using pioneering telecare technology, or in Lewisham, Lambeth, Southwark, where they've developed community budgets that work across borough boundaries to support people into work and improve local skills, but spending less, or Wigan Council changing its entire approach to prevention of ill health to reduce costs in the health budget and improve public health in their area. These are examples I've picked that are Labour councils, but I know that you've been doing this across the board. But local government finance is at tipping point, and these further cuts come at a time when there is a need for you to be doing more, whether it's safeguarding children at risk from neglect, violence or sexual abuse, whether it's looking after the children in your care, supporting disabled people, or whether it's caring for the elderly. On elderly care, 3 things are together creating a perfect storm. Our population is ageing, there's growing concern to see the quality of care improved, and there is less money for it. Council services are vital for helping keep older people healthy, independent in their own homes and out of hospitals, whether it's a grab rail at home, some home-cooked food, meals, or a day centre. And we've seen councils pioneering work on this from Derbyshire down to Torbay. And this is not only important for the people who get the care, but without these services, there would be even greater pressure on the already overstretched NHS. And everything that you do is interconnected with other services. And there are big issues at the other end of the life cycle as well, not only with public concern about safeguarding the most vulnerable children, but public demand for childcare provision. Last week's report by the Family and Childcare Trust showed that in a quarter of local authorities, there's a shortage of childcare places for 3- and 4-year-olds. In a third of local authorities, a shortage of places for 2-year-olds. And in a third of local authorities, a shortage of after-school care and holiday play schemes. Early years provision is so important for children to get a good start in life and for parents who want to be able to work. And there's a demand for more, but central government cutbacks have already constrained the vital work of children's centres. When there's less money, the growing demand for statutory services puts even greater pressure on the other important things that councils do and that people want you to do, like supporting arts and culture, like supporting leisure centres. This work shapes communities and gives a sense of neighbourhood identity that people really value. And there's no chance of the big society if locally services that build communities are being undermined. All of this is having the greatest impact on the communities you serve that have the greatest needs. And there just is a sense of unfairness that over the last 5 years, the 10 most deprived areas had their spending power cut by 12 times the amount that's been cut of the 10 least deprived areas. And the workforce delivering services have already faced a squeeze, both in numbers and in their pay. Many of them low paid and relying on tax credits, which we fear are set to be cut. We all know that the public finances need to be brought back into balance, but this shouldn't be done in such a way that compromises the basic viability of vital council services. You cannot empower local government if you choose to impoverish it, but empowering local government is exactly what needs to be done. This must be the devolution era. We know that devolution is key to driving economic growth throughout the country, raising productivity, and crucially, rebalancing our economy. Devolving will help us reform our public services and ensure they better meet local needs by giving places the freedom to innovate and tailor services to meet the specific needs of the communities they serve. It's good for our politics, re-engaging people at the local level. The devolution to Scotland, Wales and London, which we initiated when we were in government, has energised the whole devolution agenda more widely, and rightly so. Against a background of mistrust in politics, people want decisions taken closer to them by people who they think have a better idea of what's going on. And against a background of the financial squeeze, working across services within and across local areas is not just a luxury, an added extra, but an imperative. And you've shown what can be done when local government gets more freedom to innovate and redesign services to meet the needs of local communities. When it comes to devolution, it's not enough to talk about it, it's got to be done, and it's got to be done everywhere. It's got to be in our county regions, our towns and suburbs, as well as our great cities. And it's got to be coherent, not piecemeal. It can evolve, but it must be coherent. No areas must be left behind. And government must walk the walk on devolution, actually handing over power, not just saying they are, and the resources to go with it, and not dictating how it should be done. It's a contradiction in terms to do devolution from the top down. And I think it's wrong for central government to say you can have devolution, but only if you accept the mayoral structure which we're dictating. The Cities and Local Government Devolution Bill is going through Parliament. We want greater devolution in housing, adult skills, transport, back to work schemes and business support with money as well as powers. And I pledge that we will work with you to ensure that your perspective is reflected in that legislation. There's widespread agreement that the country is facing the biggest housing crisis in a generation. And just talking to some of you before I've ascended to this podium here and asked what's the top of the agenda, without exception, every one of you has said housing. And of course, that's because we're building fewer homes than half the number we need. People want to be able to own their own home, but the percentage of people who own their own homes is falling. And the age at which people get to buy their own homes has gone up to 33, which means more and more people continuing to live at home with their parents when they want to be in a home of their own. The government must do more to get new homes built. We want people to be able to buy their own homes. We want to see as many people as possible fulfilling that aspiration. But the government's proposals on extending the right to buy to housing associations risk making the housing crisis worse. They plan to force housing associations, which are, after all, independent organisations, to sell homes to their tenants with a discount to be paid for by councils selling off their most valuable homes. Their promise that every home sold would be replaced is not worth the paper it's written on, bearing in mind that though they made that promise for council homes, for every 10 sold, only one was ultimately able to be built. And forcing councils to sell high-value properties would strip you of the ability to manage your own housing stock and lead to some quite bizarre outcomes, like councils being forced to sell off new properties before even the first tenant has gone in. So far, the government have been wholly unconvincing in trying to show that this scheme could be made to work at all. We'll see what the government brings forward, but any housing policy, the test it must pass must be that it must ease rather than deepen the housing crisis. So we won't be supporting any proposal which effectively delivers a double whammy across housing associations and councils and doesn't actually build the new homes that people need. And when it comes to legislation, we're determined to ensure that the EU referendum doesn't happen on the same day as any of your elections. I think that that needs to be a separate day. And if you agree with that and you don't want to be standing for election in your area, in your ward, with the overhang of the discussion about Europe, please do let your party, whichever it is, know. Please do speak out on this. The government is considering it at the moment, but they need to hear it from you as well as from me. So do let them know about that. They're coming back with some further thoughts about it in September. And that is not on the same day in council elections in 2016 or in 2017, depending on when the referendum is held. As well as being elected yourselves, you're the gatekeepers of our democracy. The framework is set in Westminster, but you appoint the people responsible for running the electoral registration system. Over these years, the system has developed a number of major flaws, and the latest changes that the government has introduced is set to make the problem even worse. The Electoral Commission estimate that already up to 7.5 million people are not on the electoral register, but the people who are not registered are not evenly spread throughout the population. If you're over 60, white, own your own home, live in a non-metropolitan area, you will be on the electoral register. But if you're young, black, renting, live in an inner city area, you are very likely not to be on the electoral register. This is discriminatory in the people who don't get a right to vote. It's supposed to be that everyone has an equal right to vote, but they don't if there isn't equality in the electoral register. And it also undermines our democracy because it's on the basis of the electoral registers, as they will be at the end of this year, that the new parliamentary constituency boundaries will be based. So I hope that you will, amongst all the other pressing demands on you, address this fundamental problem by continuing crucial work to ensure that everyone who should be is on the register by the end of this year. We all know that part of the work of building trust in politics is making sure that people can see in politics a representative cross-section of society. That means women as well as men. It means people from our diverse ethnic communities, people from all walks of life and all ages. It's great that at this conference there are councillors here in their 20s, right up to people up to in their 70s. And I'm not even talking about myself there. This is not just about people seeing politicians who understand their lives. It's also about better decision making, bringing in vital first-hand understanding of the diversity of people's very different lives. It avoids narrow groupthink. A balanced and diverse team, genuinely representative, makes better decisions. Can I conclude by reaffirming that you can count on us to hold the government to account and be a challenging opposition. We want to work with you on that. But there has got to be some challenge from within government too. I'm sure you'll all be glad you have a new Secretary of State. You will all... Okay. You will have seen his work on the city deals, and you'll be hearing from him later today. He has a very important job in the cabinet. Unless he makes the case for and stands up for local government, then local government will struggle and will not be able to achieve its future potential that you all know that it has. For all that means for the economy, as well as local communities, and the people you represent will suffer. Speaking as someone who's done 30 years of political service in Westminster, some of the politicians I most admire from around the country are people who've done decades of political services in local government. So it's been a pleasure to work with you. Thank you for what you do.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Harriet. I thought that was a really wide-ranging and considerate speech. You've clearly given a lot of thought to this because recognising how important local government is to government and to the way that we govern this country is vital, of course. So we've got around 10 minutes now for question and answers. If I could ask that people indicate very clearly, and the lights are coming up in the room now, so I should be able to see people clearly enough. Wait for the team to come with a microphone. And when you do get the microphone, please do tell us your name and the authority where you come from. Okay, can you indicate if you have a question?
Thank you very much. Good morning. I'm Councillor Sandra Hawke from Test Valley, which is in Hampshire. Housing is the top of our list. We all agree that. But over the past 10 or more years, there are hundreds of thousands of permissions out there, already granted, not built. So instead of trying to scuttle around and build more new ones, why do we not lean on the people who've already got the permissions to get building what they've already got permission for?
Okay, we're going to try and take these in groups of 3, and then I'll take a tip from Harriet about who best in the team to answer these. So we'll take the second question. It's over here, number 4.
Jenny Lynn from Halifax, Cabinet Member for Skills and the Environment in Calderdale. I'd like to hear a bit more about the problems that some of the residents in wards like mine experience, where the real big issues are shortage of social housing to rent and really lousy conditions in some of our private rented sector.
Yeah, very good question. Any other questions? Okay, we'll take those 2 and it may well prompt further questions. So the first one then on stalled sites and the second one on housing condition.
It's obviously a source of great annoyance when there's pressure with planning applications for places which people feel are less suitable, when you've got places which have got planning applications and which are dormant. And we did do some thinking through and discussing about this in relation to some sort of use it or lose it provisions. And I think that, you know, there's every reason to be working up an agreement about how that should be done. You know, nobody wants, you know, unwarranted grabbing of land, but actually land banking which has got permission and which is not being used, and where the value just appreciates and it's just used as a capital asset and not being built on, is very frustrating for everybody. So I think that there's work that we... what's the political situation in your authority, Sandra? Oh, right, sorry. Is it Conservative?
Sorry?
What's the political
we're
colour?
Conservative authority.
Okay. Okay, so have you got your own plans about how you think that should be dealt with?
Yes, but you probably wouldn't like to hear them. I'd just take all the permissions away.
Take all the permissions away? Oh, well, I'm sure we can work together on that. But the point about private rented is very important. I mean, obviously, one of the things that we're seeing, certainly in my neck of the woods, is a lot of families in private rented accommodation where it's creating major insecurity because they find the rent is put up and they're hoofed up and they daren't complain when it needs maintenance, or they just get turfed out. So I think there is work to be done on making sure that whilst we have availability in the private rented sector, it's of the right standard and security. And I don't know whether I could bring in Emma here on this, or Steve.
Well, I spoke to our Labour councillors yesterday, and almost all the questions were on housing, and today we find the same. I think, as Harriet said in her speech, we face an urgent and growing housing crisis that, let's face it, successive governments have failed to get a grip on. On the question about stalled sites, what we were trying to do when we were in opposition towards the end of the last Parliament was come up with proposals that essentially strengthen the hand of local authorities when they are faced with this situation, because let's face it, some developers like to sit on the land and see if the value increases, and there's a lot of speculation around land, which is one of the problems. We've got such a big problem with getting houses built. So we had both a carrot and a stick approach, but essentially we want to work with you to put pressure on government to make sure that local authorities are in a better position when it comes to these negotiations with developers, not only for driving the number of affordable homes up on sites, but also in terms of getting these sites built out. On the private rented sector, I thought we had very good proposals. We've had an election since then, obviously, but I think we had some very good proposals around strengthening provisions for private tenants, particularly around security of tenure, because if you are settling now in the private rented sector because you can't get a council home or a housing association home and you can't afford to get on the housing ladder, then you are stuck in a situation where you only really have 1 year certainty, and that's rolled over year on year. Now, some landlords are very good and will give longer tenancies, but that's not the standard. And again, there are some Conservative MPs I know, as well as lots of Labour MPs who are worried about this, and we will continue to put pressure on the government to do more about security of tenure. And just very quickly, again, on Jenny's point, there's a huge shortage of social housing across the country. This is acute in many of our urban areas, but let's not forget it's really acute in our rural areas as well, and it's something that the government needs to look at more carefully, and we will be holding them to account on that too.
I mean, we could possibly, if we haven't already done so, do an amendment to the Cities and Local Government Devolution Bill, put forward an amendment about land banking and how we would deal with developers to kind of spark a more focused discussion with government and with yourselves about actually remedying this.
That's a very
So
good
get
offer.
drafting an amendment as you sit there. We'll carry it off with us.
Well, we can certainly make sure that the LJ policy unit do make contact with the kind of the cross-party view from the association on that, and we can work in our own groups then to kind of feed through the party structures. We've probably got time for one or two more questions, and then we'll wrap up for the political group meetings. Okay, so I'll take the one down here, board number 2, and then up there, number 1.
Yeah. Okay, Richard Chataway, Warwickshire County Council. At the CCN conference last year, I had an opportunity to ask Jeremy Hunt, the Secretary of State for Health, a question about the Care Act and the implementation of the Care Act, and in particularly how the pressure that was being put on local authorities. So far, still haven't really received enough information on that. But the issue around the Care Act, we were expecting people in our communities to deliver care, and some of them are on the lowest wages possible, doing some of the most difficult jobs within our society. How can we, or how can the government attack this problem of low pay, particularly for those people who are caring for older residents?
Very good question. And number 1 on the top.
Yes, it's sort of Sandy Martin, Suffolk County Council. It's a sort of tradition for ministers and shadow ministers to come along to LGA conference and tell us all how wonderful all the councillors are. But as a councillor, I think we maybe ought to be a bit honest about how rubbish some councillors are. We have a councillor on Suffolk County Council who currently lives in North Carolina and visits Suffolk once or twice a year and picks up his allowances. Isn't it about time we did something about the 6-month rule and made councillors actually do what they ought to be doing and stop bringing local politics into disrepute?
Okay, so we have a question on the Care Act and a question and comment on the standards of councillors or councillors behaving badly. Obviously nobody in this room, but people who aren't in this room perhaps. Harriet?
Well, you know, if there's things which are being done wrong and out of order, then the party who they're representing needs to be getting onto it, and you know the rules need to be you know, adhered to and enforced. But I think that so, you know, I'm not saying, you know, every individual is an absolute beacon of virtue, but I'm saying that this is important work which we should have a bigger focus on it. And it's kind of, there is a kind of secular trend going on here which we've got to go ahead of and not be left behind on, because people have got higher and changing standards on this, and they do want overall strategy, they do want good, decisive leadership, but they actually want things closer to them on the ground as well, and we mustn't get left behind on that. And this is for us to be thinking about, you know, doing better on this than when we were in government, and kind of locking it in so that it doesn't be a situation where it's asymmetrical. You're always very keen on it when you're in opposition, but somehow it doesn't happen when you're in government. I mean, we've got to find some way to lock that in. On the Care Act, obviously, it's a bit like a parallel with childcare, in the idea is that anybody can do it. It can be low-skilled, women's work, insecure, lack of training, lack of professional respect, dedicated, overstretched workforce, but dealing with people with very high levels of vulnerability. I met a group of care workers in the West Midlands who were saying that, you know, I have to supervise medication, I have to put elderly people into a hoist and lift them, I have to wash them, and I'm regarded as unskilled. And I know that if I went down the road to Tesco's, I would get a higher paid job, and my children are losing out because I'm doing work in this sector. And you know, that is not acceptable for the care workers, and it's not acceptable as a way of building good standards. So it is something that we have got to address, and I think Steve wants to say something more on that.
Yeah, thanks, Harriet. The problem we've got is we've got funding going down while demand is going up. We've got an ageing population, we've got more and more older people, but councils have got less money to spend on these services. So the way that they're delivering them, and they don't see any other way to do it, is putting pressure on the workforce, on the front line. And we're seeing horror stories like 15-minute visits, care workers not being paid for the travel time between one visit and another. And all of this is having an impact on the National Health Service as well, where people, because they're not getting adequate care in the home, are left in the health service where the costs are higher than if we properly funded them to get the home care that they deserve and that they need. So we need to be looking at how we can bring the health services and the care services together and integrate them better. But I think we also need to be looking at how we're treating those workers on the front line. And there are very good examples if we look around the country. There's a Sunderland Care Home is a workers' cooperative that delivers care services in some of those areas. Oldham have set up an ethical care company owned by the council. But in both of those cases, the workers have more voice and more ability to control the decisions about how the services are operating. And even within the same financial envelope, they've found ways to deliver better services and provide better job security that leads to a happier workforce that then performs better. So we're needing to look around for innovation in this whole area, and as ever, it's local government that is showing us the way forward.
Great. Thank you. Well, we've reached the end of our time. I'll probably just kind of take the standards question head on, really. I mean, it's probably a universally held view in the room that the standards regime is toothless and that there should be far more powers available to councillors to remove those members who let the side down. But let's be honest, democracy is a funny old thing. At times, the electorate will elect people who they know fully are not going to do the job and maybe are a bit crazy. That's the real world. And again, to caveat, of course, nobody in this room. Now, I think we've had a really fantastic session. Can we show our appreciation to our panel members?